Okay, good.
Hey, Ray.
Yeah.
The staff wants to move that table. Okay. So Terry was thinking maybe the photographs and things could go to that table or some other table. I said we'd take care of it.
Okay. So this is just on.
Appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, in about 10 minutes, we're going to start the sequence of events. And so it's a good time to use the restroom or grab yourself a drink.
Those are my things.
Oh, your things. Are you
He's in charge. Because
okay, right.
over there. So he's got the schedule. If you're like before you get down.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Start up. The only thing that might change is being said we have a lot of members, so he might not be ready in time. But that's okay.
Nothing that I can do anything that might not be right. You better go find it. All the people.
Okay.
Good work.
The mastery app of like
Kind of quiet. First 2 seconds quiet. The movie would be that one. The first 5 seconds of quiet, and then it don't like that people be right when we start talking.
I dig your narwhal. It's a unicorn whale.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Are we at all worried that the speaker is directly up to the field? And also that everyone who's sitting there?
There's nothing to be done there.
That's more like saying, I get a big rate.
No, I was comparing I've got soft stuff. Maybe it's in there.
I thought you had that.
Yeah, with the grids. But there's one I have one. We have them. I mean, you and I can sit here.
Carry my this is the life today.
You know what? Went down and
Yeah, well, and then there's mine.
yeah, I have this fine.
takes so long.
People seem to be such a nice thing here. Like, thank you. Okay.
Because he was so like,
Thank you. Oh, we only have half. All right.
So, when you go up, okay, when is that slide?
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so okay,
One, two, press. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to start the celebration of life. And we can get everybody's attention here, Bradley. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Just a real quick to Terry, to Liam, to Lisette, Bless's family, Ray, to Lulu and Tracy, and to family of friends. It's an honor to be here to actually help navigate this celebration of life tonight. I'm Pete Rogers, and I've known Terry for about 25 years. We went to an aviation college together, and we share a very, very big love of aviation and a wicked sense of humor as well. So the crazy times we had in college, we did everything from jump out of airplanes together and did some traveling and all kinds of stuff together, aviation related. We were inseparable, if you will. The first, I would say, out of the 3 years of college that we were super close, I would go visit her up in Maine, visit the family. And ironically, her parents, Lulu, were never there when I happened to get up there. And it's almost like I didn't really even exist. You know, she's like, who's this friend that you do crazy things with and travel all over and do stuff with? But I don't know who he is. Never met him. And kind of fun names for Terry and I that we've had all along for all 25 years. And so I am Hobbs, and she is Calvin. And for those of you who don't know, that's a cartoon. For the younger generation over here, it's a cartoon where the Calvin, which would be her, has an imaginary tiger friend, and nobody knows who it actually is. So that would be me. Additionally, I did throw it in there because I was her maid of honor and she was mine at our wedding. So that was awesome. And yes, she actually did make me carry a basket and throw petals out. So in keeping with the tradition of being Calvin and Hobbes, it explains why I have not met most of you until tonight. Keep a good thing going. I do know that if the tables were turned and things were different, I know that she would be in Rhode Island with my partner doing the same thing, being here to help out. So I know you would. The sequence of events tonight, I'm going to read a quick poem that she's asked me to read, and then we're going to have some speakers, and then we're going to open the floor for remembrance where folks can get up and actually share some experiences, some thoughts. And then we're going to have a presentation, and Terry's going to speak, I think, right before that, and maybe a few words after, hopefully. So last night, Terry said to me in the kitchen when she was looking around the room, can everybody hear me, by the way? Okay. So last night she looked up, she had tears in her eyes, and she said something to the effect of, why does it take someone having to die to have so much love in a room like this come together? And that really hit me profoundly. And it really made me do a lot of thinking today about the importance of celebrating life while you still have it. So let's think about that tonight as we're going through this and thinking back on life. Terry also asked me to read a poem. And this poem is one that she described to me last night when she gave it to me as one of the most recent ones that Les really fell in love with. And I agree with you, Terry. When you gave it to me to take back to the hotel last night to read, I was bawling my eyes out. And it's very powerful. So, this is a poem by William Wordsworth, and it's called I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margins of a bay. 10,000 I saw, I, at a glance, tossing their heads in a sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be more gay. In such a jocund company, I gazed, but little thought that wealth the show to me had brought. For oft when I lie on my couch, I lie in vacant or in pensive mood. They flashed upon the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. With that, the Dean of iSchool and a colleague of Les Gasser, I have Alan Bernier.
It is an honor. Hi, everyone. So I first met Les about 20 years ago. Yeah. Oh. Just come on. I think it just went. Now, yeah. So, hi, it is an honor. I first met Les about 20 years ago. It was 1999, and I was invited out to the Graduate School of Library and Information Science. I thought just to give a talk, but I found out that it was a job interview near the end of the event. And I actually met him not physically face-to-face first, but one of the meetings with students was in a seminar room. His class had just vacated. And when I stepped into the room to chat with students, I looked at the whiteboard, and there was a logical formula that I knew very well because I had done my dissertation on that, more or less. And I thought it was just me and 10 other people who had any interest whatsoever in this obscure formula. And I said, what's this? Who is here? And the student said, oh, that was one of Les Gasser's seminars. And you could tell by the way they said it, that Les Gasser's seminars were really something. So this was a topic in artificial intelligence and logic. The next day I had coffee with Les, and I wanted to talk about that formula on logical omniscience. He wanted to talk about quantum physics, Bell's theorem, quantum entanglement, all that stuff. Considerably little about that. He was one of the most ambitious intellectual thinkers that I've ever met in my life. And I mean ambitious intellectual thinkers in a positive way. He was also a highly accomplished researcher in distributed intelligence, tremendous number of citations. At the same time, he would ask questions like, how did language come into existence? What's the connection between information and life? And early on in our many coffees, when I arrived, I kind of commented on this to him, and he said, what else are you going to do except dig into the most important problems that there are? And that was when he warned me to do that and only that and not get involved in administration. Those copies, by the way, just another sign of how caring Les was, because he sought out new people. He became a mentor to many of us. He was not just a brilliant, ambitious intellectual, he was one of the most kind, caring people I've ever met. He immediately took me under his wing, was tremendously useful to me in many, many different ways throughout those entire 20 years. First, as a mentor in research, and then later actually helping with the administration of the school. In the classroom, he was also pretty spectacular. Well known for always treating his students as equals. They were colleagues, perhaps junior colleagues, but colleagues, and they were being invited into a great intellectual adventure. When the school needed an exemplary citizen, you know, Les was also talented there as well. He had the ability to, in an administrative role, in a leadership role, to be simultaneously creative, but also measured, balanced, carefully weighing both sides. He didn't want to rush to a conclusion. He wanted to make sure everybody participated. He wanted to make sure that voices that hadn't been heard were heard. That's sometimes pretty hard to do, you know, when you're trying to, you know, move toward a particular end. Les would always want to slow down and hear from somebody who hadn't been heard. He'd want to consider another side of the problem. And also, he'd often end up proposing something that was truly unexpected and unique. Really amazing. He was never angry, never saw him angry, never saw him abrupt, he was never offended. Nothing offended Les. He was never contentious, even though he could engage and argue, was never contentious. And we didn't agree on much, actually. There are two versions of the Theories of Information course. Theories of Information A and Theories of Information B. Why is that? It's because Les and I got together to develop a curriculum, and Les is a great curriculum developer. He played a leading role with Carol Palmer in developing the required library science course, 501, very important course. He was a co-developer of this extremely important curriculum at a time when it needed to be updated and changed. So I wanted to do that with him, not Theories of Information. We couldn't agree enough. Les was taking a very social approach, and I was trying to do things from first principles, and we had a blast arguing about it, but in the end, 2 courses. I've said before that Les's impact on our school identity and culture is enormous, and it's permanent. We'll carry the marks of his being here forever. On into the future, we'll always have something of Les in our school. I guess the last thing I'll say is, Les was a tremendous friend of mine, and he is only a year older than I am. So we're both from the same generation, not just chronologically, but I think in other ways as well. If you look at Les's CV, you'll notice mysterious gaps that he's tried to cover up but without success. Mine too. Both of us found our way here in very unlikely paths. Les at one point was, I think, a zinc miner. He worked for a theater company. He was in a rock band. Really enormous. He lived on a boat in the Seine in Paris. I mean, this guy was out there, as we used to say, discovering the planet. Fortunately, I got to travel with him a few times, and it was just like the old days. So he's put together an amazing story, and we'll always have that. We'll always have that story. So thank you for letting me talk a bit about my experiences with Westminster.
Okay. David Eifert, are you ready? This is David Eifert. He's our neighbor, and he also is an Ernest Hemingway lookalike.
Hi, everybody. Terry asked me to say a few words tonight, but she wanted it to be formal. So I hope this is what you were thinking of, Terry, because this is as formal as I can get. You know, when I first met Les and Terry intimately, it was their first Halloween party, I believe. And they had friends come from all over the country to this party. Walt being a CD man, and he had gotten a lot of his product out of the dumpster somewhere in California. But anyway, that's where I kind of got a taste of Les's hot contour. You don't know, that means hot culture. After that, you might see Les walking the dogs in a jester hat. You might see him walking the dogs with a Mad Hatter hat. But he was, not afraid to, show off his hot culture. One thing Les could do, he could make bread, and boy, could he make bread. I think if he lived 400 years ago, he would be the town bread maker. Seriously. This is before computers. And then on another experience with Les, he goes, "Hey, I think we need to cook steaks tonight." And I go, "Okay. I got this new way of cooking steaks." So he got these huge chunks of charcoal. I mean, not Kingsford. I mean, big chunks of charcoal in his grill, and we threw the steaks right on the charcoal. I thought it was something from the Flintstones. I thought we were eating with Fred and Barney. Over the years, we had many Easter dinners. The neighbors, the Lakes, the Gassers, and the Eiferts. It had a heavy Greek theme to it. One of the other things I enjoyed most with Les is that he would come over and we'd drink coffee together. We would have Greek, Turkish, espresso, maybe a little Irish coffee. And many times Jim, aka Mustard Boy, would join us. Now, just a little side note, you go, why is he called Mustard Boy? Well, when he was a teenager, he used to fill the mustard containers at the Notre Dame games. They didn't give him ketchup or relish, it was just mustard. During these times, we would josh around a little bit. We'd find out we had a lot of mutual interests like music, random silliness, and things we did in our young adulthood that we didn't want our now older children to know about. Les was very good at following through on such things. One year we did a lawn art. This is where we let our grass grow prior to 4th of July, and then we mowed it so we could spell July 4th, 2006. Another goofy thing we did, and I'd probably have to say Terry was a little bit involved in instigating this, was the Pirate of the Caribbean movies with Johnny Depp. I don't know if there was something there, but so we would all dress up like pirates and go to the movie theater. Okay, so you gotta imagine there's like 6, 7 of us walking into the movie theater. The clerk is wondering why we're throwing shells and, you know, other little poppycock stuff down, you know, and then when we said, he didn't understand that either. Yeah. I walk in and sit down and I had a parrot on my shoulder and the guy next to me immediately leaves. So anyway, but those were some fun times doing that. One special time though was when, I don't know, we were together one night and I had just mentioned to Les that, you know, Les, I got a couple small trees I need to cut down. And he goes, well, I'll help you do that. And then we were hanging around together. And then, as was typical with our conversations, it started morphing into trying to figure out the verses of the Lumberjack song. Kind of goes like this. I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. I sleep all night and work all day. I cut down trees and eat my lunch. I put on women's clothing and hang around in bars. Oh, I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. So before we split up that night, we decided on a time, and Les said he would come over. I just want to give you a visual example of what I saw coming up the driveway that morning. His Les was...
Where's your babushka?
Thank you.
Oh, that's folding it.
Now, as you can see, I think Les was a little poutier than me. But this is what it was like. Him coming up the driveway, ready to knock down a couple trees. That's the truth. I go, anyone else would have blocked their doors. Except it was Les, a little bit like Psycho, but it was Les. In addition, we had a lot of movie nights with Les and Terry, Jim, and Stephanie. We started out with Sexy Beast, which hooked us good for future movies. And one of the last ones we recently watched was The Big Lebowski. That's a great movie. There's a line in the movie, "The dude abides." And with Les in mind, I will think of it as the dude will always be around, and that the dude lives in his unperturbable state of dudeness somewhere. Les, you will be missed by everyone, and you are the dude.
Next up is the brother, Ray Gatsby.
I want to let them know if you're reading notes.
I'll read them. But I'm not going on after that. Is there any way to go down? So this is pretty weird for me, weird time for me. Les was my big brother. So I've known him literally my entire life. Every time I looked around for the first 14 years, he was there. And even after he left for college, he was always there for me. I started to make a list of things, of memories and things we did together. We only got this place for a couple of hours, so I'll just try to hit some of the highlights. Les was literally a Boy Scout, but not necessarily with all the connotations of a Boy Scout. But I'm not going to get into those parts entirely tonight. Every summer, we'd spend a few weeks camping at Dixon's Pond, and he was always the go-to guy when it came to setting up the big Army surplus canvas tent, digging a trench around to be sure the rain channeled away correctly. He's the one who taught me how to build a fire without just piling some wood together and hoping. That carried over to our campouts in the backyard. He knew what we needed to bring for the night, which usually included donuts and soda. And he knew just where the rhubarb rows were in the Schraff's garden next door for midnight snacks. I don't think either one of us really liked raw rhubarb very much, but we liked sneaking it into the tent. A friend reminded me of another summer tradition. We'd create carnivals in the backyard, and Les would always drive the lawnmower, pulling a wagon for hay rides. I'm kind of glad he was about 5 years older than I was, so he finally gave up that job, and Linda and I could fight over who would get to do it next. We had family who lived on a farm about an hour west of here. Now, one of them is here over in the corner, David. And we'd often come out to visit, particularly at Christmas. One of the most memorable years was when he got a .22 rifle that replaced the BB gun. Naturally, we had to go out hunting on Christmas. Les bagged his first rabbit that day. I think, David, you might have pulled off the neck, right? Sorry about that. We made a meal of it. That led to our father building a steel-plated bullet trap in the basement. We'd spend hours blasting at little targets and breathing gunpowder smoke. And I found my first Playboy while snooping in his room in that basement.
I did not need to know that.
And the second, and and the fifth one I found just like 3 weeks ago. One of my fondest memories of Les was letting me work with him on his Triumph Spitfire and then driving me out to Lehigh, his first college, with the top down. He knew enough to wear headgear, but he didn't tell me. I spent the entire weekend trying to get all the knots out of my hair while he chuckled every time I swore. But the biggest thing we bonded through was music. He always had cooler tastes. He turned me on to 10 Years After and Bob Dylan and Roy Buchanan and Miles Davis. I could introduce him, sometimes I could introduce him to somebody he didn't know, like Larry Coryell or Tommy Emmanuel. We focused on guitarists, but he also introduced me to a lot of Charlie Parker and bebop horn players. Our recent YouTube swaps usually had what we call chicken pickers from well-known players like Chet Atkins and Jerry Reed to a couple of his favorite lesser-known ones like Jimmy Bryant and Speedy West and Johnny Hyland. What's hitting me now is that I'm seeing things that he'd love. I've got to send this to us. Can't. Last year, when Les was in Chicago recuperating from CAR T treatments, my wife, Maria, and I got to spend about 10 days with him during some difficult and yet great times. I don't know what he was thinking, but he brought his travel guitar to the hospital. And a few days in, he asked me to bring it to him so he could play. The treatment and the drugs had made it so he couldn't get his fingers to work well for that. so I got to play a bit for him. It was a small but sweet joy. I hadn't played much recently, but he liked it. One of the things I remember him telling me was a variation on what I think is a famous quote. When is the best time to start working on a new skill? 20 years ago. The next best time is now. That was really brought home pretty starkly with his passing. So I'm starting guitar lessons again next week. Thanks, Bill. I'm glad I got to spend time with Les, his family, and my sister Linda just before he died, and to watch his family's deep love surround him over his last days. The outpouring from his local friends and neighbors was inspiring and comforting to me, as I'm sure it was to Terry, Liam, and Lise. I'm so glad he got to spend some of his last hours with Dave and Bob, a couple of his close friends from grade school who dropped everything to travel across the country to be with him. And one of the most important life lessons, I learned a lot of life lessons from Les, but one of the most important that I learned from him, though I wish he taught me sooner, how to fold those damn fitted sheets. Thank you.
Right. Next we have Walt Scotchy, who's a college friend, and there's something in here which you might have to explain. This one is top fuel junkie.
Okay.
Thank you. Greetings, one and all. I've got a few notes that some of his longtime friends have prepared who couldn't come tonight, so I'd like to just read through those briefly. They'll be available later for sharing, but just by way of background, Les and I were office mates in graduate school starting in 1976. So I've had a chance to know Les in an academic profession for 42 years. So I'd like to share some of his early relationships in that academic context with you. The first is a note written by Susie Iacono, who some of you know is at the National Science Foundation these days. So Susie has written, "It has been an honor and a privilege being Les's friend all these years. Les was funny and warm and full of mischief. I, Susie, met Les around 1980 when I started working on the Compass project at UC Irvine. Walt and Les were Rob Kling students already, and so when I joined, a set of relationships began that have lasted our lifetimes. We did our research at the Public Policy Research Organization, which was then in the penthouse of the main administration building, Aldrich Hall. We loved that space and the feeling of being on high, but back then we were also very poor. I remember eating a lot of lunches and dinner together all over Southern California. I remember eating broccoli soup that Les had made at his apartment. I remember a Greek dinner at my house in Laguna Beach right after I had spent the summer in Hydra. The night ended up with us breaking dishes in the fireplace as we danced to very loud Greek bouzouki music. The next morning was awful. Glass was everywhere. I remember one or both of us falling out of a tree in Santa Monica. I am sure there must have been some alcohol involved. But we also hiked and camped in Joshua Tree and in the foothills between Corona del Mar and Laguna Beach. One Super Bowl Sunday, we ran into a rattlesnake warming himself in the sun. Oh my God, casually walking past that snake was hard, but it was on that hike and on that day that Les and I professed our collective religion to be primitive animism. And henceforward, it was a running joke. We would tell each other about the looks on people's faces and the questions we got when filling out forms for hospital admittance, for example, and they would ask us for what your religion was. And boy, did we like to tease each other. I never forgot the summer that I was writing my PhD thesis, locked in a room in a squat building in Tucson, Arizona. Guess where Les was that summer? Paris, of course. He loved Paris. He was living on a houseboat on the Seine, and he would send me emails describing in minute detail his latest adventure and the meal he had just had at a bistro or a brasserie. Man, would I get mad. He was having a blast, and I was suffering in 100-degree plus weather. I'll go on just to say that there's more that she has to say, but let me move on to some stories from his colleague, Ann Myshak, from the University of Southern California. So Ann writes, since I could not join you, I decided to write a few short stories about how unconventional and academic Les was. Les was fearless. When we received a considerable grant of money, which is literally about $15 million at the time, we realized that we needed a full-time project manager and several advanced programs. Before I knew it, he had jumped ship from his computer science department to join me and in the Institute of Safety and Systems Management, my home at the time. To this day, I never met anyone with the confidence, curiosity, and risk-taking that Les showed to leave his home department and take on this new role. Les was a cool guy to my kids. When my kids were young, we would go around the neighborhood singing Christmas carols. I mentioned this to Les one year and invited him to join us, and the next thing I knew, he brought all his friends over. We had quite a lot of fun singing. My kids thought his friends were so cool because they were in the entertainment industry. He brought over a Christmas ornament, a wooden frog. To this day, my grown-up kids still refer to Les as the frogman. Les was super smart. I remember at our first review, our project's progress to a bunch of industry executives. Les started talking about our design of the software architecture. He described how we were building an ontology. The executives actually laughed out loud and said that if he wanted to work with them, he couldn't use words like ontology. They kidded him about that for the remainder of the work for years to come. Les was irreverent. Every New Year's Eve, he had a big party. He would have all of us brainstorm which famous people would die the following year. Well, Frank Sinatra is owed, so he'll probably die, he would say. And we would check on how good our predictions were from the prior year. That was just plain weird, but he loved how it was the exact opposite of so many other parties, which would celebrate what famous people had accomplished over the years. Let me skip ahead to say, Les meeting Terry. There was a copy machine down the hall from our offices. Context, so Terry was a graduate student at the Institute of Safety and Systems Management. There was a copy machine down the hall from our offices. We had hired a secretary to do our administrative work. Then one day I noticed that Les was starting to handle all of his own copying and offering to do others at many different times throughout the day. After a little sleuthing, I realized why. He was accidentally bumping into Terry in the hall to have a conversation. And above, yes, so in a way, Anne is part of the reason why Les and Terry have come together. Les was a great friend, and a great friend to so many people. He left such a strong impression on so many people, making us better people. While I will miss him, of course, his impact on my life is so large that he will be with me for the rest of my life. And my shop. Another friend, Jeff Bowker. I first met Les, I think in 1988 or 1990, when I came to California with my new partner, Lee Starr, who had been a close friend of Les's for years, being involved with her in a visionary early connection between computer science and science studies. Lee and Jeff were both living in Laguna Beach, and we went up to his impossibly romantic home in Venice Beach. My clearest early memory of him is a few years after this, when Lee and I had moved to England and were feeling longing to be back in California. We met Les in Paris for a workshop on distributed collective practice that we had organized with Bill Turner in June of 1992. We three sat on a terrace in the pictured above, bore you with my poor French, an old Roman amphitheater where old friends would gather to play the traditional game of Pentacue, please correct me, in the sandy circle below. It was a glorious sunny day. Les had been in LA during the Rodney King riots the previous month. He kept us spellbound for an hour with first a richly evocative account of his being there. He painted word pictures that stayed with us both. Then we started talking about the causes of the riot, and he gave a lucid, brilliant interpretation of how they had come about and what they meant. As ever with him, I was struck by the delicacy and profundity of his insights. He evinced these qualities whenever we met. He had an astonishing intellectual range. Whenever I had an arcane intellectual issue to think through, he often already thought about it and was always providing fresh ways of looking at it. We talked cybernetics, complexity theory, the origin and nature of language, so many conversations that will stay with me. When Les and Terry were getting together, Lee and I worked to bring them both to the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He was not an obvious fit for our school, but we were sure he would give so much to the community, and he did. He was a spectacular teacher and mentor. Our lives interwove at different places over the years. I always knew him as a friend of the heart. My deepest condolences to his family. Last, I want to just add a little personal note that I penned together. So I started out thinking about, okay, so I have 42 years of history with Les that I tried to boil down into about 4,000 words. And then I was informed, can you get it down to about 400? So here's what 42 years kind of boil down to me, and obviously I'm just going to touch on a couple of highlights. From the earliest days that I knew Les, the mid-1970s, Les enjoyed being with people, including family and friends, all of whose lives he enriched. Les was relentlessly creative, playful, compassionate, and musical. He enabled those around him to attain more than they thought possible. His research embodied the concept that organizations are a kind of technology, while computer usage and computing technology are a kind of organization. In the 1970s, Les entered graduate school in the Information and Computer Science program at University of California, Irvine. He brought his musical and cinematic inclinations with him. On something of a dare, he challenged both me and him to take a ballet class at UCI. We ended up actually taking many more dance classes over the next few years. And by the way, the people in the dance department were in awe of the fact that these two scrawny computer science guys were actually trying to seriously participate in dance. Okay, and we were like, it's not computer science. This is so much fun. Okay, because nobody cared about software or computing, but we had to learn to think about things like pliés and Batman and Rangettes and the like.
Can you show us?
I'll spare you those for a later late night performance, I guess. Okay. So along this life path of dance, I met and married a dancer myself, my wife, Christine. On our first trip to Europe as a couple, Les took Christine and me to the airport where we told him we were going to get married while there. He was surprised, elated, and illuminated in ways that I hadn't seen before. What a great send-off that was. I mean, it was just kind of special because in that way, I mean, the life I've had with my wife over the last 40 plus years was instigated in part by a coincidental relationship of starting to get involved in dance. So I owe part of that to Les, obviously. So together with Les, Christine and I, and sometimes others, would often go off and experience many contemporary or experimental dance and music performances. This was one of the many lessons that we knew and loved. Another Les I imagined I knew was Mr. Gasser, a legendary fictional character originated and illustrated by the artist and car customizer Ed Big Daddy Roth. Just a show of hands, who knows about Ed Big Daddy Roth? Okay, I notice it's mostly people of a certain age, which we'll say is over 30 for the crowd. Mr. Gasser was an avid enthusiast and a practitioner of hot rod culture and someone who embraced drag racing. Mr. Gasser was affiliated with other enthusiasts of the Gasser subgenre.
So for those of you
who haven't seen this, there is a book on the subject titled Gasser Wars, okay, which is about that whole culture of a group of people who want a particular enthusiasm around a particular technological embodiment of vintage cars with certain configurations. And I kept telling Les, it's like, this is your calling. This is your calling. Gasser Wars.
You know, when you gave us that book, I thought it was just a Wednesday night at our house, over the dinner table, Gasser Wars.
So as we see, there's more to it. So Les enjoyed our many forays to watch major drag racing events at the Pomona Fairgrounds. When he brought his date and aviation enthusiast at the time, Terry, with him to join us at the drags, I knew she was destined to become the life partner of Mr. Gasser. Terry and Les went on, of course, to have a loving life together. So, Mr. Gasser rules. It was also a joy to hear Les, the dad, share his pride and love for his son, Liam, for his accomplishments in the Boy Scouts and his work as a pool lifeguard. Les spoke of his confidence of Liam as he attends the University of Illinois. Les's eyes would also line up sharing about his daughter Lisa's latest artistic creation and her enthusiasm for dance and gymnastics. Les held his children deep in his heart. Finally, I just want to acknowledge some of the other people that Les touched and enriched the lives of, who, in learning about the event today, reached out and wrote either little messages or longer and the like. So some of you may have heard of these people, some of you may have not, but the list of people whose life was enriched by Les include Kathy Les and Hal Thomas, longtime friends, one of his academic mentor, Rob Kling, Susie Iacono, John Leslie King, Elihu Gerson, Alan H. Bond, Lee Starr, Jeff Bowker, Bill Turner, Ann Myshak, Vic Lesser, Hamid Ekbia, Will Dutton, James Namber, Kenneth Kramer, and Peter Freeman, also advisors, Randall Hill, Mike Priatula, Kathleen Carley, Nicholas Roquet, Lynn Marcus, Debbie Broadback, and many others. Many sent thoughtful words and brief remembrances about the Les they knew, loved, and respected. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take like a 5-minute break so folks can get settled, maybe get another drink, whatever. But we do have one more speaker, and then we'll wrap it up fairly quickly here. There is a wonderful slide presentation that we hope you can stay for. But quickly, if you need to do something, we'll get back. Start up in about 5 minutes.
You're gazing on me. Right.
Got one now.
Jim Lake, are you around, Jim? And so she did not do with your different time. Did you have any others? Yeah, like you read another. It's here.
Yeah, right.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get going with this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is their dear neighbor, goes by Lord Jim, apparently. And this is Jim Lake, next door neighbor.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. I'll keep this short. I know we're running a little long, but I'm real pleased to be able to say a few words about my neighbor and dear friend, Les. And I've known Les for 18 years, and not only was he my friend and neighbor, but he was our friend and neighbor, which is to say, he had a special relationship and I'll say a sacred bond with my wife, Stephanie. And Dave, Mr. Eifert, referred to the Cottage Grove community that we have had, where the six of us, Dave and Renee and Les and Terry and Stephanie and I have just had this wonderful relationship over the past 18 years. You know, at our house, if there was a knock at the door, we're pretty sure it was Les. And if it wasn't Les, it was Terry. And they were there to bring gifts of conversation and food and flowers. And towards the end, Les was focusing on gladiolas for my wife, Stephanie. In terms of our friendship, it was really based on conversation. Les and I would talk about literature and politics and travel and film, music, food, art, and design. And I've got a long list here, a long laundry list of all the things that we talked about, but I won't go into that. I will say that the New York Times provided us an endless source of subjects. Paul Krugman was his North Star, I would say. I remember just, it was only a month ago, I'd say. So many of these things were only a month ago. That's what's extraordinary, because he was vibrant and with it to the very end. But he was saying, so where is the conservative version of Paul Krugman? Dave already mentioned the cooking, the perfect bread, the sardines. I remember one time for the Easter, he also mentioned the Easter, Greek Easter get-togethers that we've had. And one time I wanted to make a rack of lamb, and we were talking about how to make it. And Les said, well, I've got this cookbook that it's all of the classic meals, beef bourguignon, coq au vin, whatever it was. This book has gone through and tested it and determined the best way to cook it. So that's the way we cooked that rack of lamb that time. Another thing we shared was Les was a real Francophile, and as am I, and so we had wonderful conversations about the places that we visited and the things we've done. I'd say his favorite film director was Godard. Definitely French New Wave he liked a lot, and American Noir too. All sorts of conversations about literature and politics and music. I won't go into those though. This morning, as I was thinking about what really captures Les as I saw him, and he relentlessly pursued beauty, I think, is the way I see it. And then he looked to share it with others. That's what he was all about. He just spent time on the things that he cared about, and he wasn't going to mess with the rest of the stuff. So Les has enriched my life here in this Midwestern flyover town more than anyone else. And you can see from all of the tributes that there's a long list of those people. And I won't have any more live conversations with Les, but I know that I'll continue to talk to him in my head whenever I encounter these things of beauty that we share together. So that's really all I have to say.
Okay, in the interest of time, I think we'll have time for just, if they're very brief, anybody that wants to come up and give some kind of remembrance. Do we have any? Anybody want to come up?
This is a pretty weird time for me. I've never known Les my entire life. Oh, wrong one, sorry.
Ray.
Okay. I have two things to read from, one from Linda, his sister, and one from Bob Kelshaw, who's been a good friend of his. I'll read Bob's first. 60 years, that's about how long we've been friends. 60 years through family trials and tribulations, we've enjoyed a closeness unparalleled with others. Les was always a wise and patient man. He loved to tease me and laugh, mostly at my expense. But that laugh and chuckle was always welcomed. I'll miss it. We grew up a little more than a block apart. Of course, that lent itself to continual mischief and adventures. I remember, after it was mentioned on one of the Facebook posts, the Gasser carnivals in the backyard of the house. What neighborhood fun. One winter in the late 60s, Les and I both decided to start a snow clearing business. We had both purchased large snow blowers. I remember walking the neighborhood behind those machines after the first snowstorm. I don't think we cleared any driveways that snowy day and probably just caught cold for our troubles. But we had a great time. One summer, Les filled in for me on my paper route while I was on vacation for 2 weeks. I just purchased a new bike, which I offered to him to use while helping me. Of course, I was sure to explain that it was a new bike and to be careful. Well, unknown to me for many years, he wrecked it one day. While the damage was slight, I never knew it until he told me sometime later. I'll miss him. There's an emptiness now that will take time to resolve. I love you, my friend, and I hope we meet again sometime. You're a great friend. Bob was one of the people who he's known since grade school who came out a couple of days before he died. And from Linda, though I'm not here with you, I want to thank you all for coming to honor the life of my brother Les. Right now, I'm with our Swedish exchange sister, Elizabeth, from 48 years ago, who also knew Les well, and we are grieving and toasting him together, along with you all in heart and spirit. I want to say a few things here, however, and thank my other family members for reading this on my behalf. What can I say? I love my older brother. He called me sister, and I called him big bro. Even though he teased me often when we were kids, I still followed him around, wanted to be with him. I wanted to be like him, and I wanted him to have to pick up the table and do the dishes that I had to do, so I could do most all the things he got to do as the older boy. I looked up to him, and years later I hated it when he was out of touch for long periods, doing his own thing. Linda, come here and clean that up. I went to his PhD graduation and drove across country, coming back east with him, stopping in Illinois to see relatives along the way, like David. He got stopped by a deputy for speeding and just nonchalantly happened to mention that his local Uncle Don was the sheriff in these parts. That worked out well. After I had my driver's license for about 6 months, Les invited me to visit him in Massachusetts. I wanted to go, but I'd never driven that far alone, nor on big city roads and superhighways. I was afraid to go. It was then Les gave me some words of wisdom that I've remembered and even shared with my students and others over the years. He said, "Listen, Linda, have you ever not been able to do something you tried to do?" He was right. I did that trip. Still recall driving over New York City bridges and up I-95 and had a great time. He was always so very supportive of everything I did, and I loved him for that. He did the same for so many others. I know he loved his son and daughter and wife very much. He told me numerous times his family was the most important thing in his life. He wasn't ready to go, but he said in a practical way that I could hate hearing, "It is what it is." He could be obsessive and could be overly practical or rational, but he also had his times of dancing around the fire in a trash can in a tribal way. I admired his complexities and the variety of his interests. Over the last 5 years, he never wanted to be defined by his illness. He soldiered on, often sent interesting music ideas, creations, thoughts, and video over the internet. He just talked about other parts of life. And your being here today shows he will not be defined or remembered simply by his last part of his life. It's incredible to imagine life without him and how to adjust. I'll miss you greatly, big bro, and we'll hear you joined in all the music you love. Thank you. And one other quick shout out. When I was up here before, I mentioned the Triumph Spitfire that I used to work on. I'd forgotten, but he bought that from his cousin Brian. I think Brian just wanted to unload it because we're breaking down all the time.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Terry's going to get up and share a few words, and then right after that, we're going to go right into the slide presentation. And Terry has one brief thing to do after the presentation.
It's too quiet in here.
I wondered if I would say anything because it's really hard. And I'm looking around the room at all these people here from so many different portions of life and so many different facets of the man. And it's really amazing, the support that we've had over the past few years. I really thank Alan Rainier for coming here and letting me know what Les did for a living, because I never had any idea what he did. And I thought about the many stories I could tell. And as I look around this bar and I look at the pictures on the wall, I thought about one in Italy. We're on vacation in Italy and we had lunch, just lunch in this place, but it was the most perfect day to Les. And I'm thinking, you know, we've got to go to a museum, we've got an itinerary, and it was the most perfect lunch to Les. And we're sitting in the restaurant and there's this painted portrait on the wall of these boats. And he sits back after lunch and he goes, I want that picture. And of course, like any wife, I'm like, don't. And he's like, no. Calls the waiter over. I want that picture. Like he's some high roller. Right? I want that picture. I want to buy it. And the guy's like, I don't know what to tell you. It's one. So you know the waiters who are making, you know, what they make, went back and thought, we got a live one here. We can send them this. We can sell them this portrait. We can go get a poster down the street because the boss probably isn't here, right? And we'll place it on the wall and no one will know that this painting is gone. So then he's like, well, how much do you want for it? So they come to some sort of, it was lira back then. We weren't at the euro yet, you know, some sort of lira. They're negotiating it. I'm just trying to get as tiny as I can. Right? Just let's go. So they negotiate this, and he buys this for maybe 500 lira. I don't know. It is a beautiful oil painting. So I'm dying. So then once he purchases it, because he wants to remember the day, and he's like, when am I going to get it home? How are we going to get this on the airplane? So, and it's in this beautiful frame, this ornate gold frame. So we walk down the street, and there's an antique dealer down the street. And we're like, maybe the antique dealer can take it off. We can't take the canvas off the frame and roll it up and we'll put it in the tube and we can take it on the airplane home. But we don't speak Italian. But Les can speak French. So here's two English people in Italy speaking French to an art dealer trying to negotiate him to take this off of the frame for free, but he can keep the frame and we'll roll it up and get it home. And of course, Les Gasser pulled it off. And we have that portrait still today. I think the one thing that I can share without going into too many stories is how we met. And it's a really funny story. I was a grad student at the University of Southern California, but I was 29 years old at the time, just so you know. He was a professor. He was not my professor. And we worked in offices next to each other. And the building was this U shape, and it had this really long hallway. And it's an industrial old government building with the cinder block walls and tile floors. So you walk down, and of course, I probably wore ridiculous heels like this, you know. You walk down, and it just echoes everywhere. So a long hallway, and there weren't many people in the building. And so sometimes somebody would be coming from one direction, you'd be coming from another, and you'd pass somebody. And you always wanted to have a piece of paper because you don't want to stare at someone coming down the hall that far. And because it could be maniacal if you're staring at them the whole day. But then you don't want to be there the last minute, like, oh, hey, bye, you know, and then you pass, right? It's just really uncomfortable hallway. And I would see him around, and I thought, well, who is this guy? Because if you know Les Gasser, you know he had a very distinctive walk. And he would lope down those halls, pretty back on his toes, and I'm like, who is that guy? You know, he's kind of cute. And I can remember one day walking past him, and I get down to the end of the hall, and he gets down to the end of the hall. And I turn and I look back. And when I turned and I looked back, I saw him turning and looking back at me. And of course I freaked out. Oh my God, he saw me looking at him. You know, and it wasn't until years later when I was thinking of that story, I was like, he was looking at me too. So I really liked him, but I couldn't figure out how to meet him. And there was this point, when I got hit by a car out there and I'm limping down the hall. And so he goes, "Hey, hop along." And I'm like, "Oh, funny, you call me hop along? I know how you walk." And so it just opened up dialogue for us. And as I found out tonight, he was going to the happy room and everything. He wanted to meet me too. That's really funny. But here's the thing, he's this really cool guy. He's, he's tall, he's thin, he's neat, he's a little bit nerdy. I'm like, hey, all right, is he gay? And it doesn't matter what anybody is. It's just, you need to know, because if you're interested in somebody, you need to know, if you like them, they like you. You got to know this stuff, trying to negotiate this stuff. And so, we used to have this helmet lab, and we'd sit in this closet and smash these helmets, and we'd open up the door, and Les would walk by. He'd saunter by, And so one day he saunters by when I'm smashing the helmets, and it was after I'd been hurt. So, he was talking to me about the accident. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be doing any ballet for a while. And he goes, ballet? And he goes, and he does the perfect rond plie, and then a little pirouette. And I'm like, oh, cool, ballet. He's gay, I know he's gay. So he keeps walking by, and every now and then he'd walk by, and he had this book of Victorian poetry underneath his arm. I'm like, he's gay. So, things go on. He's like, hey, let's go have some tea. I'm like, I would love to have tea with you. I mean, it was a friendship. This is what you need to know. We were building a friendship. We were both interested in what the other one had to say. So we go for tea, and of course we have tea. And he picks up his glass, and his pinky's extended. And he's sipping his tea, and we're talking about the great artists. And he's talking to me about this thespian named Quentin Crisp. And Quentin Crisp was one of the first out gay actors in Hollywood, right? And Quentin Crisp would wear his little fedora cocked on his head, and an ascot, and a walking stick, and a blazer over the shoulders. And I'm like, he's gay. He's gay. And we would go to dinners, and sometimes it'd be Dutch treat. I'm like, okay, I've got this great friendship with this really wonderful man. And this went on for a few months. And we would go to events, and I did the little side hug. Hey kid, walk me home at night. Hey kid. Almost like a noogie every now and then. Yeah, a little peck on the cheek, maybe a little peck on the lips. And this was for 3 months. We started this friendship in August. And then so October came around, and I lived in West Hollywood, which is the fabulous part of Los Angeles, by the way. And there was this promenade on Halloween night every year where everyone in West Hollywood, I think they worked the whole year on their costumes. And there was this promenade for Halloween, and everyone would parade up and down in these fabulous costumes. And Les is like, hey, let's go. And I'm thinking, he just wants free parking because I live in West Hollywood. I'm like, let's go. So I dressed up as Inspector Clouseau because all I had was like a trench coat and a beret and just painted a mustache on. He came over in this weird Tyvek suit and this patch, and he puts all this paint on his face, and he's, PL somebody, some Truffaut film that I haven't seen because I'm a poor grad student. And we go to this promenade, and we have a great time. And I can remember at a point in the night, the circle comes around, and people go in the middle of the circle, and they're acting out what they're going to do. And this is West Hollywood. People were voguing, and everyone's around the circle, and they're great. So Les decides he's going to get in the middle, and I'm thinking, oh, this is not going well. I did not know that man was such an avant-garde dancer. And he gets in there, and he starts doing stuff, and everyone's like, yeah. So we get home, and I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Mom, but I found out that night he's not gay. So Halloween's always been real special because I got my first kiss. And so the thing is, he might have left on November 1st from my apartment, which is All Saints Day. And there was a joke about this because he left his coat behind. And so he emails me, and this is when email was still pretty crude, you know. And he emails me to go leave my coat there. I'm like, yeah. And it's like, oh, the old mink behind the sofa trick, right? If you leave something behind in somebody's apartment, you get to come back, right? So this was the joke between us for years. And so we began this relationship, and it was right then that I was living in LA, finishing up my degree, and he was moving to Washington, D.C. to work for the National Science Foundation. And so during November and December, he kept going back and forth to DC, and he moved there in January. And my birthday is December 6th. And so that little joke about leaving the mink behind the sofa, I used to email him funny things like, oh, you know, did I leave my armadillo in your armoire? And things like that. And so one of them was, did I leave my giraffe in your closet? And on my birthday that year, he sent me a poem. And I'm going to read you this poem. And I think we need to go into showing pictures of Les's life. And you'll see some pictures of him. And you'll see some pictures of him on that Halloween night. And they're all jumbled up. It's going to be an avant-garde presentation because chronology just went out the window this week. So that's going to be life unless we have it no other way. But I'm going to read you this and then hopefully you can start. So I write, did I mistakenly place my giraffe in your closet? And he writes, yes, but it found its way out. I watched it split into 8 pieces, head, neck, legs, tail, body. Each grew into a whole new giraffe. Each new giraffe began to shrink, tinier and tinier. And 4 of these took flight, flying giraffes. I saw these lying on the wings of a balloon boat biplane passing, 2 on each wing, left and right, spotted and swaying in the slipstream. The biplane circled, and the others leapt to my shoulders, 2 on each. They walked round in front and slid down my open shirt, passing through the breastbone. They took up residence in the 4 chambers of my heart, dancing to the beat, bobbing and finger popping.
I took a trip on the sailing ship, and when I reached Jamaica, I made a stop for lunch. So I can say I'm on my way. I will be back for many a day. My heart is down, my head is turning around. I had to leave, but it took all of it to keep from town. At night, sit tight, don't let the flights and dreams fire.
Liam and Lise, can you please? Les had a really long flight, and when he passed really suddenly. And there were so many things left undone. But there is one thing I know that he wanted at his memorial service, and this involves everyone here. Every night, or most nights, before we go to bed, we would say, night, night, sleep tight, don't let bed bugs bite, sweet dreams let you. And he considered it the greatest gift if his send-off was everyone here in unison saying that. So I can't lead it in because I'm just a mess. Night, night.
Sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite. Sweet dreams, love you.
Rest. Thank you. Drink up, people.